All right, here we go. This is a list of some of the therapists who have guided me so that I can get up here and give you my spiel. Oh, I didn't mean for that to happen. Oh, okay. Go back. Okay. And not being the expert on these machines that I'd like to be, if we can't get the screen to work, you've got your handout, right? We don't let it bother us. Okay. To the handout. What is sensory processing? And Dina, are you able to go find somebody who could show me how I could get this back on the screen? Okay. No, okay. All right. So what is sensory processing? You might know, you might have heard the term sensory integration dysfunction, and that is pretty much the same as sensory processing disorder. There's a shift to use this new term, sensory processing, because sensory processing is the big global issue. We take in sensations through our bodies, from our own bodies and from the environment, and this information comes into our central nervous system, which is our spine, our brainstem, and our brain. And then we register the sensations that come in. I just lost it on the screen. Thank you for coming back. We register them in our central nervous system. We integrate the sensations. We modulate them. We discriminate them, and then we figure out. And then our body, our central nervous system, tells us what we should do about this sensory information. All I was doing was page down, and I got a couple of. Okay, I'm going to continue with the handout because we've got this. All right, so we take in sensations all the time. We don't even think about it. When you're going upstairs, you go upstairs. You've done it a million times. But you know, if you go to somebody else's house, and maybe that house is an older home, and the stairs have settled a bit, and you're going upstairs, your toe is going to knock into a tread, or you're going to misstep. You're going to raise your foot too high or not high enough. And then you're conscious of it, and you have to do something about it so you don't fall down the stairs. But most of the time, when we're just going through our daily life, we just go smoothly, and making our bodies move is not a big issue, unless we have a problem somewhere in one of the steps of sensory processing. If you look on page 2 in the handout, there on the bottom, there is environmental senses. We mostly hear about, when someone says, oh, I'm going to talk about the senses, we usually think about environmental senses. But of course, there are more than 5. The 5 we're most familiar with are sometimes called environmental, because something out there in the environment has to arouse our sensory equipment. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching are sometimes these environmental senses. Something has to happen. For instance, we have to put socks on with sock seams. Do you have kids who complain about their sock seams? That would be an environmental stimulus that is affecting the person. Or a pat on the shoulder, or rice pudding. These are things that might bother somebody who has a tactile sensitivity. Now, we have these environmental senses, but these grow over time. We don't expect babies to be born with these senses going very well. The next picture shows body-centered senses, and these are the senses that we're born with. There's the vestibular. I'm going to talk about these a little more. The proprioceptive, interoceptive. This is the sense of what's going on internally in our internal organs. Ceptive comes from the Latin word for knowledge. So you might know what your stomach is telling you. It's empty or it's full. but we don't ordinarily know what our spleen is up to, and yet all of our organs have to be running well all the time for the rest of us to function. And when they're not running well, we could be out of sync. Another sense, if you have a pen in your hand and wish to, you might put tactile there under interoceptive, because actually the tactile sense is both a far external environmental sense and a body-centered sense. And when it's body-centered, it tells us what our sunburn feels like. It tells us how our tongue feels lying against our teeth. It tells us about that itchiness in our skin after we've had contact with poison ivy. You can't get rid of a body-centered sense, whereas you can get rid of an environmental sense. And this is an important distinction. Think of our kids who slap their hands over their ears and they complain that the noise is too loud. It's just the radio. It's not bothering anybody else in the family. But sometimes there will be children who are very sensitive. We have to believe it. We can't jolly them out of that. We can't say, oh, don't be so silly. It's not loud. Get over it. They can't. It hurts. When a child is complaining about a sunburn, you're not inside that body. You don't know. It can really, really hurt. So we want to be aware that there are things that kids can't get rid of. They can take their socks off if the sock seams bother them, but they can't get rid of the feelings that are always with them. Turn the page, please, to page 3. Now, the tactile sense is one that we're born with. And Dr. Jean Ayres, Ayres is how you spell her name. Dr. Ayres was an occupational therapist who formulated the theory of sensory integration or sensory processing back in the 1940s and the 1950s. And the tactile sense was one of the three that she was particularly interested in. And I like the tactile sense a lot, too. When 2 of my 4 grandchildren were born, they were born at a hospital near me, and I raced off to meet them. I got when they were 3 hours old or 4 hours old. They were pretty new. Greeted my son, greeted my daughter-in-law, went right to the baby, ripped open the swaddling blanket, and took up these infants because I wanted to test their tactile systems. So first thing I did was I stroked the babies, the soles of their feet. And both my granddaughter and later my grandson retracted. It's just hours old, but they knew, they felt it, they couldn't use it, they wanted to get away from it. And the whole baby body just kind of pulled away. Then I offered an index finger. And these teeny, teeny babies grabbed for the finger and held on for dear life, just as they should. I blew a little bit into their faces, and they blinked. The hairs on their eyelids, the skin covering the surface of their eye, detected that puff of air, and they wanted to protect themselves, so they blinked. I stroked their cheeks. Aha, this was something good. Like the index finger they could grab onto. They turned toward my finger stroking their cheeks, toward the source of nourishment. I folded up the swaddling blankets and handed them back to their mother for that. So, we're born with the tactile sense going pretty well. Now, what we hope in a perfect world is that the baby will learn how to defend himself, how to get away from sensations that are not going to be useful, that may be potentially harmful. And then after many, many tactile experiences, the baby will learn, okay, there are lots of touches that I can take. I'm going to not let them bother me. I'm going to tolerate them. I'm not going to let them bother me. I'm going to get on with it because living is fun. So somebody can accidentally brush against a child's foot under the table, and in a perfect world, the child won't be bothered with that. He's not going to holler to the teacher, help, help, someone's trying to kick me, because he knows it's just a benign touch. We can always, we can always revert to our, this is the defensive part of our tactile system, and we can always revert to that if we need to. So if I threw a jar full of spiders out into the room, you would immediately know that that was not something you could use in a good way. You'd stand up, you'd brush yourself vigorously, you'd try to get rid of all that icky, crawly stuff all over you, and then when I called the spiders back to the jar, you would calm down, you'd sit down, you'd get on with it, unless you have a tactile problem, and then it might bother you all day long. So we have two components of all of our senses. We have a defensive component and we have a discriminative component. And we hope that by the time kids get to school, they're ready to discriminate. They're not defensive all the time. They're using their senses to learn. Our senses have two primary purposes. The first is to help us survive. And when we feel safe, when we feel that survival is a possibility, then we can use our senses to discriminate what's going on around us and to learn. Take away that comfort level, and you take away the ability to learn. This is a chart that shows how we grow toward being more discriminative. We start out as teeny babies being very defensive. By the time we're ready for school, we're using our senses for discrimination. And again, I'm talking about in a perfect world. Dr. Ayers talked about the vestibular sense. Now, whereas the tactile sense is huge, our receptors are all over our body, all over our skin surfaces, especially around our hairy parts, like our eyes, and even we have hairs in our nostrils that protect us. Think about our head. Under our hair is our skull, which holds our brain, which is pretty important. So our hairy parts are very important. I don't know why we have hair on our big toes. So if you figure that one out, let me know. So we have a big tactile sense. We have a teeny vestibular sense when we're talking about the physical parts of it. It's in our inner ear, and it tells us when our head is off center. It's like a carpenter's level in there. Anytime we tip our head, we register it. So right now, close your eyes, and this won't hurt a bit. I just want you to, with your eyes closed, to bend way over to the left. And then, with your eyes closed, come back to the center. And open your eyes. That was good. Now, some of you were a little tentative about that. Let's see how it goes to the other side. Close your eyes, bend all the way over to the right. Way over. Get a good stretch. Good. Come back to center. Very good. Okay. Yeah, very, very centered here in Brooklyn. Let's stand up and try this on our feet. Please do put your papers down. You can hold the babies if you if you need to. Okay, let's see what happens now. I'm going to ask you to stand on one foot. And I'm going to count to 4 while we do that. So, get ready. Go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Very nice. You weren't even thinking, well, maybe you were thinking about it, but you can be on one foot for a nanosecond. You know, when you walk, you're on one foot and then the other. When you go upstairs, we don't think about it too much. That was very good. Okay, let's add something to that. Please put your hands straight out in front, both hands out in front. Great. Okay, we're going to do this again, standing on one foot with your hands out. Ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay. Sometimes it's nice to hold on. All right, let's do this again with the hands straight out in front. Shoulders down, tummy in. Okay. This time I'd like you to stand on one foot on your non-dominant foot. That will be your left foot for most of you. And close your eyes. Ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Harder, wasn't it? Okay, you can sit down. I won't torture you anymore all day. Promise. Okay, your vestibular sense is certainly important in your balance. And Dr. Jean Ayers, who formulated this whole theory, talked about the vestibular sense as our master sense, Do we hear about this? No. You don't talk about the vestibular sense with anybody. You ask the man on the street, he probably hasn't even heard of it. And yet it governs everything we do. Because if we are not certain where we are in relation to the surface of the earth, we feel like we're in outer space. And this is a big issue, which when I describe processing problems, I will go more into it. It's really, really nice to know that you can pull yourself together, you can stand on one foot with your eyes closed if the teacher asks you to do that, and you know it's not going to last forever, and you can sit down pretty soon and breathe a sigh of relief. But it would be a big, hard thing if every step you took, it felt that you had those challenges. And we're here because we know children who go through the day as if they're standing on the wrong foot with their eyes closed. That's why their feet never leave the ground. Another kind of sense that Dr. Ayers explored was the proprioceptive sense. Now we're on page 4. And this is our sense of our muscles and our joints. Every time we stretch, we are activating our proprioceptive sense. We're getting good input into our bodies. So right now, as I'm talking about the proprioceptive sense, I want to see you wiggling your ankles and bending and flexing your knees. I want to see hands over your head. Do whatever you have to stretch. And think of our children in our classrooms who would like to do that too. They'd like to wiggle. They'd like to stretch. And let's encourage all the teachers in the world to let kids do that, because that is the way they're going to learn. If we say to kids, sit quietly, don't move, we are removing their ability to learn. All right. The stimulus for the proprioceptive sense is stretch. We know our bodies really well by this age. You know your bodies really well. And I know that without looking down, if you look up at the ceiling, I know that, and I'd like you to do this, please recross your ankles or your knees. Good. Fine. Okay, and now you can go back again to the position that you're comfortable in. Good. You know where your ankles or your knees are. You don't have to look down and see or pick up a foot and physically cross it over the other. I didn't see anybody do that. But there are people who don't know where their bodies are. You know, the kids, you're trying to get them into their jackets, and they'll put one hand in, and then they chase around trying to, you know, like a dog chasing his tail, because there are kids who don't know. You do something on one side, and then you can do it on the other. They haven't figured it out. They have to see everything. Please lace your fingers together like this. Now, look up again at the ceiling and relace your fingers so the other thumb is in front. Now, if I said to you, okay, ladies, I want you to sit like this for the rest of the time, would you be giving me your full attention, or would you be thinking about how crazy that feels? Isn't that odd? Isn't that feeling kind of funny? Here's another one. Cross your arms. I just want you to know that, because proprioception tells us where our body parts are and what they're doing and where we're comfortable. And now think about this. What do we do with our kids? We say, sit the way kids are supposed to sit. Sit on the chair. And how many kids do you know who get half of their bodies on the chair and the other half out here, and their foot's kind of groping around on the floor and they're wiggling and jiggling? Or how about children on the floor? You know, I spent 25 years on the floor with little preschoolers, and there would be kids who'd sit in the W position. These are loose and floppy kids, and their W position is knees together. And that's a position that many children will choose because they're loose and floppy. They don't have a good vestibular and proprioceptive sense that tells them which way is up, that gives them the capability to develop good muscle control and good oomph. They're kind of hanging over like this. And that wider base actually helps them stay upright. What to do with kids who sit in the W position? It's very bad for their knees. It's terrible for their knees. So it's a structural problem that we have to prevent. Well, you give them something to lean on, like a beanbag chair or a collapsible canvas camping chair, or let them sit against the wall, or sit them on a therapy ball. Actually, a big ball will help them with their posture too. But the thing to do is not scold them because they're sitting that way, because that way they feel safe and then they can listen. As they get older, what do we do with kids in school? We put them on regulation school chairs. And have you ever met a school chair where all 4 feet hit the floor at the same time? No. So say they have a vestibular problem and they're not sure where they are in space. Their head, they're not getting all that information that typical children do. They're wobbling all the time. Are they going to listen to the teacher? No. They're going to want to be safe. And that's why they're wiggling around so much. All right. What we need all of our senses, our environmental senses, our body-centered senses. We need all this information to be whooshing around constantly, coming into us through our bodies, through our environment, getting processed in a regular way, and then we can be regulated and function in daily life. And this is to show how all the information comes in through our senses, goes into our brain. That's what this thing is. The brain tells the child or the person what to do. The person acts. He is an agent in life. Things are not done to him. He is acting. That's what we want. Active learners, active children. And by acting, he is keeping that feedback running, and more of his senses are getting nourished. When you think about important human activities, the more important they are, the more senses we use. And you think about activities that are useful for survival, eating is an example. We use almost all our senses for eating. We don't use our vestibular sense very much. But think about protecting yourself. Think about walking down the street and you don't notice that there's a stone in the road. And you trip on this stone. Think of the senses that kick in immediately. You feel it in your tactile sense, the skin in your foot, inside the shoe. Your skin rubs against the shoe. Or if you're barefoot, your skin rubs against the stone. Your proprioceptive sense gets a jolt. You feel that in your ankle, your toes, your ankle, your knee. Your vestibular sense says, yikes, I'm falling. Your visual sense says, uh-oh, here comes the sidewalk up towards your face. All of this information comes rushing in, and what do? You don't analyze it here in your prefrontal lobe. You don't say, what should I do to protect myself before I fall? Who has time for that? You do something very instinctive. The impulse comes from deep inside you, and you thrust out an arm or a leg in what's called protective extension to break your fall. We are equipped to sacrifice an arm or a leg so that we can protect what is our most important parts for survival, and that's our head and our torso. Children with sensory processing problems, for instance, children with autism or Asperger's or a lot of other disabilities who have sensory issues as well, are very poor at protecting themselves. That's why they're black and blue all the time. That's why they trip on air. Give them sufficient time, and they could do it. But the information comes in, and it kind of gets scrambled, and they have difficulty responding in a typical way. So we need to protect them as well as we can. What do we need sensory processing for? Well, I think we need it pretty much for everything. Here's a list of how we need it physically. For balance, as I showed you when you were trying to stand on one foot with your eyes closed. For balance, we use our vestibular, our proprioceptive, and our visual senses. 3 senses are needed for something important like balance. Body awareness, where our body parts are. When the teacher says, okay, everybody, stretch up tall like a tree, We need to have our tactile and proprioceptive senses telling us how to do that, and our vestibular sense as well. Self-protection, like not stumbling on a stone in the road. Motor coordination. And it's a terrible thing in this country these days. What we're doing to children by depriving them of recess. We need more recess, not less. We need more time for children to stretch and run and move. Lines painted on the blacktop and one ball is not sufficient for recess. 15 minutes a day is not sufficient recess. Our children, every child, I'm not talking just about little ones. I'm talking about 8th graders, 12th graders. We've got to be moving, or else we're sunk. And over and over again, I want to pound this into everybody's heads that movement is learning. The way children develop is their gross muscles develop first. That it means they learn to move their heads. The baby can turn his head. The baby learns to flip over in the crib, and he uses his head and his torso to do that. And the arms and legs come afterwards, like an afterthought. The baby learns to crawl and creep before he learns to walk. If your baby skipped crawling, that might be a sign of some sensory development issues. Everybody has to do everything. You have to crawl before you walk. I mean, you can walk without crawling, but what happens is that you jeopardize what's called bilateral coordination, which is using both sides of the body. Kids who don't crawl have difficulty reading. And they run into a lot of motor coordination problems later. So we need to get them to crawl, even if they're not inclined to do that. That's gross motor. And then after doing a lot of gross motor play, then come the fine motor experiences. The ability to use a pen with skill, to articulate words, because the articulators of speech are fine motor muscles, the lips, the tongue, the jaw. The ability to see well, far sights and near sights, far and near, blackboard, book, teacher, book. The ability to do that, those are fine motor skills that come after many, many gross motor skills. So, we see this across the country, across the world. Children with lousy handwriting also often have poor speech articulation and poor visual function. And give them more gross motor activities, and that might help smooth the way. We need, but who thinks about it? We do. Bilateral coordination. This is the ability to use both sides of the body together for catching a ball or holding onto the swing ropes. For eating a grapefruit, you hold it with one hand, use the spoon with the other. For cutting a paper, for writing, for using your eyes in binocular fashion. Here's a little exercise for you right now. Just keep your chin forward but swing your eyes over to this wall, and keep your face right where it is and swing your eyes to that wall. Back and forth and back and forth. That's a little bilateral work. And we should be able to do that. We should be able to move our eyes and our head without moving our whole head. But do you know children who read this way? They have to move their whole heads. Or there's action out on the playground, and they're watching the action, and their whole body has to turn like that. Could be a sensory processing issue that's preventing them from differentiating their small muscles and making their eyes go back and forth. By the way, I want you to remember that little trick when you lose your car keys, because researchers have found that if you wiggle your eyes back and forth this way, you actually stir up your memory. And I told this to a friend who's always losing her car keys, and she said, "Carol, that is fantastic. I just have to remember to do it." Okay, we need sensory processing for crossing the midline. That's using the eye, the hand, or the foot in the space of the opposite eye, hand, or foot. So when we do this, we're crossing the midline with our eyes. When we take a paintbrush and we paint a horizon, we're crossing the midline. You might know children who can't do that. They go this far and they stop, put that brush down, and reach for another brush over on this side of the easel tray to finish. Crossing the midline helps us not stumble every time we take a step. Helps us kick a ball across our bodies like that. We need sensory processing to determine hand preference. And by the time kids are 4 or 5, they should have a hand preference. Very, very, very few people are actually ambidextrous. We need it for flexibility, being able to bend over and pick up a pencil that's dropped without this. Have you ever seen anybody drop a pencil and go for it this way, not wanting to move his head an inch from being in one rigid place? We want to be able to see kids drop the pencil, bend over, and pick it up like that. But if the vestibular sense isn't working well, you're not going to see that. Flexibility is more than physical. We want to see our kids be able to tolerate it when a babysitter comes or Booby comes over and mommy's not there, or something different happens at school. There's an assembly, and everybody's going to go to the big room together. And we want things, different, unpredictable things, not to get our kids to be too upset. We need sensory processing for postural security. That's being upright when we need to be. That's getting into different positions to go through an obstacle course, for instance, and then being able to right ourselves again. We need it for gravitational security. This is the knowledge that we're connected to the earth, but we can leave it if we need to go on a balance beam, to get on a swing, to jump on the trampoline. You may know children who have what's called gravitational insecurity. Their feet are rooted to the earth. You will not get them comfortable on an elevator. When it is an extreme problem, it's called GI, for gravitational insecurity. And again, you can't jolly a kid out of it. You can't say, it's just an escalator, get over it. It's deep, internal, true, primal fear. Muscle tone. We need to have enough oomph so we can pick up a bucket of paint and pull open the sticky dresser drawer and pull the brush through our curls and use what's called force, or use our muscles in an appropriate way for the task, so we don't overshoot when we reach for the milk pitcher. We don't break our toys. We don't have trouble putting Legos together and pulling them apart. We have the muscle tone. We're getting that information through our muscles to tell us how much effort to exert to function well. We also need sensory processing for oral motor skills, using the articulators of speech, getting it all together so that we can express what's in our minds to talk about. And so often I know children who have noble thoughts, beautiful thoughts, so much to share, and they can't get it out because they can't get the parts of their bodies working to make the words come out. We need sensory processing for visual and auditory development, and visual spatial perception. This is how close am I to this other person. When the baby is born, the baby's gaze is perfect to get a pretty good idea of a face that's about 18 inches away. And that's about how far it is when you're holding a little baby in your arms. And then as we grow, as we have many, many more visual experiences, the eyes get fine-tuned and they get to see further and further. We are designed to be outside a lot. We've been created to be a part of this world, looking at the horizon, looking at what's coming at us. I know I'm addressing a group where television is not a big issue for you. I'm so glad about that, because all of these modern busy screens that so many American children look at are terrible for their vision. But when we're looking out afar, we're actually enhancing their visual development. Visualization, that's the ability to picture things in our mind's eye. And we need to be able to play with the blocks and the Legos now so that when we're 10th graders, we can visualize what a cylinder looks like, or a pyramid, or a cube. Lots of children struggle with geometry, for instance, when they haven't had the experiences of working with different objects as playthings when they're little, when they've spent all their time playing through an electronic screen. But I don't have to worry about our guys here. We need sensory processing for eye-hand and eye-foot coordination. And auditory perception for hearing the sounds around us and learning to process. Dina was talking about how children in China they hear the sounds that we could not replicate because we don't speak Chinese. But they couldn't speak Yiddish or Hebrew either because we learn to hear and discriminate what are the sounds that are useful to help me express myself so I can learn and I can survive. We need sensory processing for ear-body coordination. That's a term I made up, but nobody told me I couldn't use it, so I'm still using it. And that is when you hear a drum beat, being able to make your body march to the drum beat. Lots of kids can't do that if they have sensory processing issues. Timing and rhythm. Again, have you noticed some children will be singing a song that they enjoy singing, but they're always a few words slower than everybody else? Or clapping. They like clapping, but their rhythm is off a little bit. They're not quite in sync with everybody else because of a sensory issue. Okay. Turning the page, we need sensory processing for social emotional development, and this is a biggie. Self-regulation is being able to wake up in the morning and move from sleeping mode to waking mode. We need sensory processing to be running smoothly so that we can fall asleep. And a lot of us need something extra to help us wake up and fall asleep. Maybe you need some strong tea or coffee in the morning or a hot shower. Maybe at the end of the day you need soft music and your favorite fluffy slippers. We figure out what works for us. And this takes time for us to figure it out. But basically we should be able to self-comfort ourselves and to find out what helps us in any given moment. I was noticing earlier there was a mother with a baby in her lap, and she was the baby his head was right here in her elbow, and she was rocking him this way. And what's so interesting about that is this is instinctively the most calming movement for a person. For this baby in her arms, that was linear movement from front to back. And I'm seeing it in the back row right now, too. This is the rocking chair. If you hold your baby and you rock in the rocking chair, try to have the baby going with his face going the way yours is going, forward and back, forward and back. That is the most calming. Next calming is side to side, doing this kind of thing. Then it gets more complicated when you go in the diagonal. It gets most complicated when you turn in circles. And you will see some children seeking that. Spinning, they're doing self-therapy. They need that intense vestibular experience. It's not calming. Well, it is calming for some children, but for most children it's stimulating. But if you want to help organize your kid and calm him down, get him in that rocking chair, back, forward and back, forward and back. We need sensory processing for emotional security, self-esteem, and a can-do spirit. When you feel good about what your body is helping you do, you can try new things. When, on the contrary, if you're not secure with what your body can do, if you know you're going to trip on air, are you going to get up and try? Probably not. We need it for good social skills and healthy relationships with others and the ability to express our feelings, thoughts, and needs. Now, you've been so good so far, I'm going to give you a reward, which is a little break. Everybody needs a little movement break every 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm going to demonstrate something for you. I guess I'll do it one-handed, and then I'll put the mic down, and we will all do it together, two-handed, if you can do this. Because the tune is, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Do you know this one? All right. Well, if you don't know it, you'll figure it out. Okay. Alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Now, you have two hands. I don't. Okay. So use both hands. Alive, awake, alert. Two hands on your head. Alive, awake, alert. Alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Okay. On your feet, if you can. Alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. I can't do it alone. Thank you. That's a little activity song. You could sprinkle that kind of thing all through the day. You can do that with children who are not ambulatory. I've done it with kids with spina bifida who have braces and they can't stand. And you can do it seated. Or you could do more. You could do alive by bending over and touching the floor. And jumping when you get too enthusiastic. So whatever suggestions I give you, take them. Run with them. Okay, onward. Sensory processing is important for all of these things, too. This is what I call my occupation of childhood list, because occupational therapy is a very useful therapy. I suggest it as the best therapy for kids with sensory issues. And when people say, but kids don't have occupations, I say, yes, they do. This is their part of their list. Getting up, being part of the family, going to school, getting dressed, undressed, all of that is part of their occupation. And if there are problems in daily function, just ordinary stuff, let's put on our sensory lenses and ask ourselves, could it be a sensory problem that's at the root of it? This is an upside-down looking building structure with blocks to show you that we're born with pretty good touch, balance and movement, and body position. And a rudimentary visual and auditory senses too when we're born. And as we grow, we keep building and building and building on this foundation until school age, when we expect our children to have academic skills, complex motor skills, etc. But we can't expect them. It's impossible for them to be up here if this is a shaky foundation. If we get kids who are good readers and smart as can be, they can do it, but at what cost? When the rest of their bodies are not working really well, when they don't have good relationships with others, when they're anxious and fearful and full of afraid qualities. And I think we put a lot of demands on our children without understanding that there are things that are physiologic things that are holding them back. So sensory processing disorder, this is the inability to respond appropriately to ordinary experiences. Now I put appropriately in quotes here. Remember my little boy on the blacktop who was so fearful when I came toward him. And when he shoved me, he pushed off my glasses and shoved me down. Definitely, that was inappropriate behavior. You don't do that to a teacher. But then look at it through sensory lenses and you think, my gosh, that child was simply trying to protect himself. It was appropriate for him. I was a huge danger to him because he couldn't get it that I was coming to help. His tactile sense was saying, uh-oh, someone's coming close. His visual sense was saying, I can't interpret this. I don't know what this means. And he did what he did to protect himself. Appropriate for him. And how does this happen? Well, and usually it's a genetic problem that we have sensory processing issues. It usually runs in the family. It's also, when it's not genetic, it's environmental. Those are the only two choices. And environmental means a difficult pregnancy where something happened in utero. Maybe the mother took poor care of herself and ate potato chips for 9 months. Maybe the mother took excellent care of herself, doing everything to ensure her baby's health. But perhaps something went wrong in the placenta. It's nobody's fault, but that can affect a baby's neurological development. Sometimes babies are put in orphanages after birth, and they're not given the loving attention that they need. The environment is not stimulating for them. Or they could be babies who are preemies, and they have to spend some time in a hospital till they develop better lung capacity, for instance. And there are all these tubes and bells and whistles, and all of this is very, very stressful on that tender neurological development. Sometimes we don't know why it happens. It's nobody's fault, though. Nobody is doing things wrong except maybe the potato chip eating mother. But usually it just happens. And then we're learning what we can do about it. Here are some hallmarks of SPD. SPD is sensory processing disorder. Our great human commonality is touching and being touched, moving and being moved. And these are the words of Stanley Greenspan, who you might know his work. He's a wonderful child psychiatrist. He's written a terrific book called The Child with Special Needs. And Dr. Greenspan knows how important sensory processing is for children's development and regulation. This is a taxonomy or a classification of sensory processing disorder. Where sensory processing disorder is the main term, and in it there are three main categories of dysfunction. One is sensory modulation dysfunction, a second is sensory discrimination dysfunction, and a third is sensory-based motor dysfunction. The most common is a modulation problem. You're going to see this not only in children, but in adults, perhaps even in yourself from time to time. We all have modulation problems from time to time. And for most of us, it is temporary. Waking up in a darkened room to go get a drink of water in the bathroom. And you go into the bathroom and you turn on the light. That is visual dysfunction. You need to stand there for a minute and blink a few times until your eyes get adjusted to the bright contrast. Being pregnant can do a lot of funny things to your sensory system too. You might be clumsy, for instance, where ordinarily you're not clumsy. So extreme over or underreaction is what we're looking for, where the degree, intensity, and quality of the responses do not match the demand. There are three patterns of modulation problems. The first one is over-responsivity. This is the most common. My little friend on the blacktop was over-responsive to visual and tactile sensations. He went on afraid mode, defensive, right away. There will be children who will fuss over the simplest things. There was a little boy named David, for instance, who would come to nursery school wearing a button-down shirt. And the other kids came in T-shirts and, sweatpants and things. No, he was dressed for the office. He was 4. And one day, And his hands never left his pockets. His hands were always in his pockets. He was an expert on dinosaurs. If you asked him what was in his pockets, he'd pull out these little plastic dinosaurs and tell you the difference between a carnivorous and an herbivorous dinosaur. He never did anything. He did not interact with the other children, but he noticed everything. He was hyper vigilant, always watching, and he was the conductor. He would tell the other children what to do, and he would critique them. Do you know children like this? He would say, "She's painting that pumpkin with a purple crayon. She's not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that." Okay, and here's this kid having a wonderful time being creative with her purple crayon, and David is saying, she's wrong. Or that block isn't supposed to go there. You're not supposed to. Always full of all this. The other kids didn't like him. They didn't want to play with him. He never was any fun. He was just the judge. Do you know this kid? One day I saw he had a little paint on his impeccable cuff, and I said, hey, you got some paint on your cuff. I'll bet that means you were painting. And he goes, "Oh, no, horrors, land sakes alive, heavens to Betsy, Lord have mercy." And he has this list of all these comments, like he's checking off, I'll say that. And then he says, "This is the shirt I wear to weddings." Okay, poor little David, 4 years old, and totally inconsolable over this. Was he painting? No way. He was skirting the paint area in the classroom where someone else was spritzing the paint all over the place, and a little bit got on his cuff. David fussed over the snacks. He was very uncomfortable coming to the table to sit down. When he did need to sit down, he made sure he sat at one of the rectangular tables, not the round ones, but there was a little rectangular one where he could sit at the end. Heaven forbid anybody else took his seat. And why did he sit there? Because then nobody's foot could touch his underneath the table. These kids come up with compensatory behaviors that are fabulous. And it's not that many of these children with sensory processing problems are very bright. And sometimes it is their intelligence that helps them come up with a compensatory way to behave, but lots of times it's instinctive. They just will do what they need to do to defend themselves. So that was David. In the same classroom, there was Jonathan, and Jonathan also had over-responsivity, but instead of standing back and talking a lot, as David did, Jonathan was much more physically aggressive. But it was the same underlying problem of over-responsivity. And the way he handled it was to be very aggressive. And he would go around like this. Arr! And one day he said, "Mrs. Kranowitz, do you want to know why I do that?" And I was thrilled because, you don't ask a 4-year-old why. You may, but you're not going to get a satisfactory answer. For heaven's sake, don't ask an adult a why question. Most people don't know why they behave the way they do. You can ask a what or a where to a little kid because they're much more concrete. But anyway, he offered this to me. Do you know why I go around like this? I go like this. So I can get them before they can get me. I thought that was so fascinating. He also liked to have a stick in his hand, and if he could, and we didn't do sticks at this nursery school, so we would remove them. But you cannot, I want you to write this down or think about it hard. We cannot remove something of value without replacing it with something of equal value. And this is a rule for life, I think. He needed a stick. He needed something in his hand. He was a kid who needed tactile input. Dina Gorkin and I were talking yesterday about holding on to something to help you know you're there. You have a pen in your hand, even if you're not writing, it gives you contact with something. Her sister had seasickness in the car, and her dad figured out how to take a paper plate and give it to her and tell her to pretend it was her steering wheel when she was in the car, and it helped her be over this problem with seasickness because our tactile system tells us we are connected. All right, that was Jonathan. He needed just to have something in his hand. So instead of sticks, one really smart teacher took a garden hose and chopped it in 2-foot lengths, and all the kids had a little piece of garden hose. And you would be amazed at the inventiveness of the children. They could water the garden, they could pump gas, they could scribble in the sand, they could run with it, they could even toss it, and if it bonked somebody on the head, it wasn't the end of the world. They could do a lot of things with this little hose. Here's what Jonathan would do. He would play fireman. He'd be in his fire truck. And then if he wanted to play with somebody that he really wanted to play with, he'd go right up to this person and he'd say, "You're fired." You know, he didn't quite get it right. It wasn't a way to make the other child want to play fireman with him, you know, being fired. But anyway, that was his way. This little boy had terrible, terrible problems being touched and touching. When he was an infant, he, at a remarkably young age, he pulled himself up off the mattress. He held on to the rungs of the crib and pulled himself up because his parents thought he was very precocious, and he was indeed precocious, but he was doing that because he couldn't tolerate the sensation of the sheet on his face. He never crawled. That was too much contact with the earth. At 9 months, he was running on his tiptoes. The sensitive soles of his feet couldn't stand the pressure against his shoes or against the floor. His tactile issues were intense. His picky eating was a huge problem. The teacher said, you know, all he wants at snack time is carrots and pretzels. And the mom said, well, that's all he eats at home, too. You know, that's not really a very good diet. Did you want to say something? Have what? Do they have what? Many of these children have been diagnosed with Asperger's. I would say 100% of children with autism have sensory issues, and I'd say 99.5% children of Asperger's have sensory issues too. It's part of the package, right? Can I, Dena Gorkin? It's not here. All right, I'm going to keep talking for another few minutes. Okay, everybody with me? All right, press your hands together really hard. Press, 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 press. Good. Okay, over your head. Okay, good. Do that without me. Okay. All right. Food. All right. So, Mom says, well, you know, he doesn't eat a lot, but he might, every once in a while he might have a potato chip. And she said, it's really funny, it just has to be crunchy. Well, many children with food issues only like creamy, smooth things. These are kids who are on the white, mushy, bland diet. Lots of milk, lots of cheese, yogurt, pizza, heavy on the mozzarella, skip the tomato sauce kind of pizza. But this Jonathan only liked the crispy things. So after many talks with the parents, the teachers were able to persuade them to have him evaluated by an occupational therapist. And they said to the parents over and over again, you know, we see how Jonathan is pulling back from playing with the other kids. Well, this didn't matter to the parents. He was very bright and fit in with their family style. And finally the teacher said, but we're concerned because he's so lonely. And that was the ticket that helped these parents understand that being gifted intellectually was not sufficient. Intellectual prowess is not what childhood is about. We've got to be able to have friends and play with others. So they begrudgingly went ahead and had this child evaluated, and then he began to receive occupational therapy. Well, a few weeks passed. We began to see improvements in him. He was more relaxed. He was friendlier. Things were going well after just a few sessions with the therapist. And then one day the mom brought him to school, She saw me in the corridor, and she ran down the hall. She said, Carol, the greatest thing. We're getting ready for school this morning. Jonathan couldn't find his shoes, and his little brother had hidden them and wouldn't tell where. And Jonathan was, he's really liking school so much more these past few days. And finally, he took his little brother's arm. And Carol, guess what? He bit into his little brother's arm. The first soft thing he's done in his life. The first soft thing he's put in his mouth. And she gives me the high five sign. Well, lest you worry that he broke his brother's skin, he did not. But it was indeed the skin of his little brother was the first soft thing. And that was because the therapist had been helping him repress this super over responsivity to anything that wasn't crisp and hard. He had to feel it in his mouth to know it. Otherwise, it would make him gag. That was a wonderful way that therapy worked. Okay. In my book, the Good Enoughs Get in Sync, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book, but it's a book I wrote a couple of years ago for children. There's a little boy who plays the cello, and he calls it a fiddle, and he has over-responsivity. And he came up with this acronym, FIDDLE, to help people who don't understand it get it. F, he says, is for frequency. When something bothers me, like a loud sound, like a lump in, like a bit of peanut in the peanut butter, like sock seams. This happens frequently. All day long, I'm bothered by things like that. My reaction is intense. It goes on for a long time. That's what the D is for, duration. The degree is off the walls, way beyond what you'd expect another child to do when a typical child gets a lump in his peanut butter. The L is for loneliness, because children who have meltdowns frequently with intensity feel like they are the only ones in the world no one could possibly understand. And the E is for exhaustion. So Darwin is the name of this child who comes up with this acronym to describe his own behavior. And when you look at this as parents, you're feeling FIDDLE too, right? It's nice to know, I think, that there are many people with these sensory issues. Dina, do you want me to stop? 12:15. Okay, great. Okay. And this is a picture of him suffering in the classroom. Sensory under-responsivity is another modulation problem, and this is where you just don't register it. I call people who are over-responsive, I call them sensory avoiders. Their threshold, their neurological threshold is low, if you can picture this. Sensations pour over their threshold. They cannot tolerate it. What do? They avoid it. That's David, that's Jonathan, that's my little friend on the blacktop. Sensory under-responders are the opposite. Their threshold is high. You need dynamite to get them to wake up. There was a child who would come I was the music and movement teacher. He'd come into the room, he would sit there very pleasantly, passively, not participate in any way. And one day we had a planned fire drill. So it was over the door, like that red thing there, and it had a loud alerting sound. It had a strobe light attached to it to get everybody's attention. The other children in the class put down their rhythm sticks, paid attention. They were alarmed, as they were supposed to be, and we all went outside for a few minutes. Well, it was this little boy who looked at that, heard it, and came alive. He sat up tall. A smile beautified his face. He was alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. And we all went outside while the fire drill took place, and 10 minutes later came back in, sat down. This child was ignited. He picked up his rhythm sticks, he sang, and he played along with the rest of the kids. So I called an occupational therapist who helped us strategize with kids, and I told her the story, and she said, well, this just shows that he needs more intense input. He's not going to be a kid who goes and gets it. You got to give it to him. So she gave us some great tips. The classroom teachers took the sand out of their sand table and they put in mud. They started a gardening project out in the playground, and they had the kids digging and weeding and doing lots of stuff that required exertion, pulling and shoveling. They brought in a lot of chewy snacks. There's sugarless licorice that requires a lot of chewing. There's granola bars. They made sure that there was a lot of stuff for proprioception in his mouth area. You know, kids who do a lot of chewing, what are they doing? It's self-therapy. They're trying to get input into their mouths. So the teachers did a lot of that. They gave him a lot of big bear hugs. And he needed all of that input to become more responsive. Another kind of modulation problem is the child who isn't bothered by sensations, like the avoider. He gets them. He can regard them. He loves them. More. He stuffs popcorn in his mouth. He likes the volume on the radio up high. He loves potholes. He just thinks that's really fun when you're driving along and you go boom, boom, like that. There was a little guy now who would come to school every day and get on the tire swing. And I was saying before, rotary movement is very stimulating. He'd go to this tire swing and he'd stick his toe in the ground and spin and spin and spin so fast you couldn't even see him. And that is the most intense spinning you can do on your own axis. You might know children like this who seek this kind of action. You'd say to him, Sam, can another child get on with you? Or, Sam, it's starting to rain, it's time to go inside. No, I'm going to swing for 1,000,000 minutes. And he'd go round and round and round and round. You could not get him off. If the teachers did pry him off that swing before he had had his 30 minutes of swinging, he didn't have a good day. I got to tell you, the follow-up on this child. Years passed, and my son Jeremy was a teenager, and he would go to swim every morning at an indoor pool. We call it winter swimming. So he'd get up at 5:30, drive to the pool, swim for an hour, dry off, get in his clothes, come home, take off his clothes, take a shower, dry off, get in clean clothes, grab a bagel, run to school. So I said, you know, this is not very efficient, all this in and out of your clothes and everything. Why don't you just shower at the pool and save one of these clothes changing things? He said, Mom, I've thought of that too. You know, he was 16, so he knew everything. So he had thought of it. But I can't. It's just impossible because there are a lot of us at the pool. There's only a couple of showers, and there's this kid who gets in it and he hogs it, and you say, "Get out! Let someone else have a turn." And Mom, this is what he says: "No, I'm going to shower for 1,000,000 minutes." So I go, "Oh, that sounds really familiar. Is his name Sam? Does he have red hair?" And my son Jeremy says, "How do you know?" Well, Sam is now 14. 10 years have passed since I've last seen him, and this kid is still the sensory seeker. It used to be spinning on the tire swing. Now it's vigorous swimming and a pelting shower for 1,000,000 minutes. So you might know, I mean, I'm a seeker. I like a lot of stimulation. I don't think I'm dysfunctional, but I do know if I don't have some vigorous activity during the day, I'm really crabby. I'm not a lot of fun to be around, and I don't sleep well. Okay, so those are modulation problems. What else have we got under this umbrella of sensory processing disorder? We have sensory discrimination dysfunction. This can go along with a modulation problem, or it might be separate. Maybe a child has no modulation problems. or negligible ones. But discrimination is the problem. This is a child who is clumsy with differentiating among and between stimuli. Okay, he comes in from the playground and he can't tell that it's hot. He sits there in his coat. And the other children have taken their coats off and he needs reminders. He can't figure out how to get out of his coat. He can't figure out where his hook is, even though he has gone to that hook every day for 4 months. So he drops it on the floor. This is a child who cannot judge the value of things. How heavy is it? How hot is it? How near am I to that person or that object? This is the poor discriminator will invade your body space, or will not be able to project his voice in a way that's appropriate. He's the child, you say to him, can you use your indoor voice? And he bellows, okay. And he's trying, but he doesn't get it. Children with discrimination problems often have visual and auditory discrimination problems too. They can't focus far and near and far and near. They have problems with depth perception, with something called form constancy, which tells them that this is a B, and if you turn that B sideways, it's still going to be a B. They get all mixed up. With auditory discrimination problems, they don't catch what you say. Like Dina's dog, who mixed up fetch and kvetch. That dog had auditory discrimination problems. Okay. So this can be very, very frustrating if you don't know what it is that you're dealing with. If you cannot discriminate the properties of objects and people around you. And here's a picture of a guy who can't tell the difference between the weight of 2 different shovels. Another kind of problem, which I'll mention briefly, and I can come back and finish this after lunch too, is sensory-based motor dysfunction. And this has there are 2 kinds of sensory-based problems. Now we're getting into something where the cognition or learning and understanding can affect what we do. I need to make that a clear differentiation. If a person has a modulation or a discrimination problem, no thinking in the world is going to help it. No, that's too strong. That's too strong. Thinking will help it. But it is a physiologic problem if you have a modulation or a discrimination problem. And telling a child to get over it is not going to help. The kid can't without therapy or without some resources I'll give you later. But when we get here to these problems, a lot of being able to think it through can often help children who have these 2 issues. One of them is a postural problem, and the other is dyspraxia. A postural disorder, this is difficulty in stabilizing your body when you're moving or you're at rest or you're trying to get into a different position. Dr. Ayers talked about the ability to hang on and stay put. Do you know kids who get on the swing and fall right off? They don't know that they're there. They don't know how to hang on. They go through an obstacle course and they don't know how to right their bodies after they've been crawling through the tunnel, or how to bend to get through the maze. They fall off their chairs. It's as if the gravity monster is on their backs all the time, and they have to push and push and push to resist the gravity monster that makes them want to slump over like this. These children slump a lot. They might wrap their legs around the chairs to just know where they are. I knew a boy who put dabs of glue on the sides of his chair and stuck thumbtacks pointy side up in the dabs of glue so that when he fell off the chair, he'd feel the pointy thumbtacks telling him he was falling off the chair. This child had very poor postural security. Overflow is sticking your tongue out when you're writing. Well, we all do a little of that. But when you recruit a lot of muscles that are not necessary for the task, that's called overflow. Do this right now. Shrug your shoulders. Slam your ribs, your elbows into your ribs. Okay, while you're at it, clench your knees and your ankles together and get as tight as you can get. Okay, now if you have a pen in your hand, or if you don't, pick up your imaginary pen and write. What's doing the work? Your whole body. Can you picture children who do this? Can you see the pictures? Kids in your mind's eye trying to put the Lego pieces together, ooh, like this, where it doesn't require that. Because they cannot differentiate the body parts that are useful for holding the pen or for doing that with Lego. Associated movement is opening a doorknob with one hand, and the other hand is opening an imaginary doorknob. I think, I really think, I don't want to stop, but I think I must, right? Okay, and we'll come back and we'll go through a little more about dyspraxia and a few other things, and then we're going to have some activities.
Ladies, there's a delicious lunch buffet in the back. The bagels are hamaitzi. The washing area is out the door and to your right. We will be raffling off 3 sets of Carol Kranowitz's books during lunch, so listen for your raffle ticket numbers, and hopefully you'll win.